Private Thomas Schilling was a 20-year-old farm boy when he enlisted to fight in World War I. His family begged him not to go because his father had already died in the war. But he wanted to serve his country and see the world, so he lied about his age and joined up anyway. He was given the number 4679 and shipped out to France, where he would spend the next 4 years of his life in the trenches. Over the course of the war, Tom would see some of the most horrific things imaginable, but also some of the best. In this time, he would witness entire platoons wiped out by artillery fire, watch his best friends die slowly from their wounds, get lost in no man's land, face enemy fire, and so much more. But somehow, through all of this, he survived and even managed to keep his humanity. This is the story of Private Thomas Schilling, a forgotten American soldier who fought on the front lines of World War I and survived it all. This story is told through letters that Tom wrote home during the war. These were published after the war and became the book entitled Thank Heaven for the Acetone. I encourage you to read the book if you want to know more. As Tom sat on the train heading to France, he excitedly wrote to his mother, "Dear Mother, I have just finished my first day of drilling. Boy, are my arms sore. We all look like raggedy beggars, but we don't care. All of us are full of pep and snap. It will be lots of fun. I can't wait to show you the medals they gave me." And then to his sister, "I am having a grand time over here. There are 3,200 of us in camp, and we have taken 10 acres of ground for baseball. Got to go now. Lots of love to all." Arriving in France in August of 1918, Tom and his regiment were sent straight to the front. They had been ordered to relieve the 77th Division in the sector of the Chepi, which was a small village between the cities of St-Mihiel and Verdun. As they approached the front line, Tom noticed that everyone was unusually quiet. Even the officers no longer joked around. The men were visibly exhausted, having endured months of continuous fighting. When they arrived at the trenches, they found conditions worse than they could have imagined. The area was filthy with feces, dead rats, lice-infested dogs, and unburied corpses. Men slept wherever they could find space, sitting, standing, or even hanging from the top of the trench. There were no toilets, so men relieved themselves in bottles or directly into the trench. The air was thick with the smell of stale waste, dead bodies, and wet clothing. Tom described it as, "You could almost taste it." Tom wrote home, "We went over to relieve the 77th Division, which has been in the front line for 9 months. You should have seen them. They were so dirty they were black. Their uniforms were full of lice, and they looked like skeletons covered with skin. Many of them had nervous disorders. Some were blind, others had lost limbs. Most of them were so worn out they could hardly walk. When they were turned over to us, we took them to the rear and put them in the hospital where they stayed 2 weeks before going back to duty. I surely hope our turn won't come so late that we'll be in as bad a state as they were." The shelling never stopped, night or day, and the soldiers spent most of their time hiding in the trenches or below ground in dugouts, sleeping whenever they could. Life in the trenches was hard, lonely, and dangerous, but these men were determined to do their duty and defend their country. One evening, Tom and his group of friends were resting in the dugout when they heard the sound of footsteps approaching. At first, they thought it was one of their own, but then they realized it was a German patrol. The Americans held their breath and tried to stay as still as possible. The Germans walked right past the dugout without noticing them. When they had passed, Tom and the others let out a sigh of relief and continued to hide until the danger had passed. But the situation became increasingly dire, and their supplies were running low. On November, Tom wrote, "We are living on nothing but bread and bacon now and coffee when we can get it. But we are pretty well off compared to some of the other fellows who are in the front line and haven't had a decent meal in a week. Some of the boys have gone so far as eating grasshoppers and worms. Those who saw them eating them said they looked as though they were enjoying it immensely. Weeks passed and food became scarce. Sometimes they received boxes of chocolate and cigarettes from home, which helped lift their spirits. But most days, they were hungry and tired. The constant threat of death hung over them like a dark cloud, and the men grew thinner and more haggard as the weeks passed. But they held on to the hope that soon they would be able to go home. On September, the American commander decided to launch an attack on the nearby village of Chepi. The goal was to capture the village and push the Germans back. Tom and his group were part of the assault team. Before they left the trenches, one of Tom's friends, Private Joseph Martin, wrote a letter to his sweetheart, Mary. He asked her to pray for him and promised that he would return safely. He wrote, "Don't cry for me, Mary, for I shall come back to you. When this unholy war is done, I'm coming home to you. I only need your prayers and love to see me through." The men held each other close, and then they set off into the darkness. They crept forward, keeping as still as possible. Suddenly, Private First Class Clarence Berry tripped and fell, making a loud noise that echoed across the battlefield. The Germans heard him and opened fire. Tom and the others dove for cover, firing back at the enemy. Private Martin was hit and fell to the ground. Tom rushed to his side and helped him bandage his wounds, but it was clear that Martin would not survive. Tom wrote home, "Poor Joe died right in front of me. Just as daylight came, he breathed a couple of times, and that was the end. How we hated to leave him there. We made a cross for him and marked the spot where he lay, so that after it is all over, we can go back and bury him." Tom and the others continued their mission, moving closer to the village. They reached the outskirts and began to take cover in the buildings. Suddenly, a German grenade landed nearby, exploding and killing several of the Americans. Tom was knocked to the ground, and when he looked up, he saw a German soldier aiming a gun at him. Tom dove for cover as the bullet whizzed past his head. He fired back, but he wasn't sure if he hit the German. He continued to fight, moving from building to building, taking cover whenever he heard the sound of gunfire. Finally, the Americans captured the village. They raised a flag over the town hall, declaring victory. But Tom was too shaken to celebrate. He was haunted by the faces of those he had killed and worried about the fate of his friends. One of them had been missing since the attack, and Tom couldn't help but worry that he had been captured by the Germans. In the following days, Tom and his unit worked to secure the area around Chepi. They helped evacuate the wounded and buried the dead. One day, while on patrol, Tom and his group came across a group of German soldiers who had been hiding in a barn. The Germans surrendered, and Tom and the others brought them back to headquarters. Tom was shocked by what he saw. The Germans were young, just like him, and many of them were crying. He couldn't help but feel a sense of sympathy for them. He wrote home, "The poor kids are so pitiful. They aren't over 20 years old, and yet they've seen hell and are scared of nothing now. They were treated badly by their officers, so they deserted. I don't blame them." After the Battle of Chepi, Tom and his unit were given a few days of rest before returning to the trenches. He took the opportunity to visit Private Martin's grave and pay his respects. He stood by the cross, remembering his friend and praying that his soul would find peace. The war was finally coming to an end, and Tom and his friends began to dream of the day when they would return home. They talked about the farms they would buy, the families they would start, and the adventures they would have. But they knew that first they had to finish the job and help win the war. On November, news spread through the trenches that Germany had agreed to a ceasefire. The men cheered and celebrated, hugging each other and singing songs. Finally, it was over. Tom wrote home, "Oh, how we did shout for joy. For a moment I could not realize it was true. I kept thinking something would happen to spoil it all, but it wasn't to be. It is really over. We are all going home." And that's the end of part 1 of this video. If you want to hear the rest of Tom's story, please subscribe so you don't miss out on part 2. Thanks for watching.